Warren Snow is the manager of Envision New Zealand, an environmental and economic development consultancy formed 10 years ago. Envision offers strategic planning, research, project management and marketing services to clients who include businesses, councils and non-profits. Warren has promoted waste recovery and minimisation for many years.
Kia ora everybody, kia ora koutou katoa. Appreciate the opportunity to speak from ESR, great organisation. Got a lot of admiration for you guys and what you do. I'm basically talking about Auckland's waste crisis. I do believe it is a crisis, and I suppose we have a tremendous opportunity now with a new council, but it's also applicable right around the country. So I'm picking Auckland obviously because we're here, and the key things I want to point out or communicate are that to point out why privatisation of Auckland's waste has failed, how Kaitaia, as an example of a community, turned its waste into a mini economic development powerhouse, considering it's only got a few, 10 or so thousand population, and then propose a new deal for Auckland's waste that would show perhaps a different model. So we'll go to Auckland's problem. Privatisation, although well-meaning, and it was a trend 15 to 20 years ago where councils sort of said, well, it's no longer our problem, we've handed it over to the private sector, and thinking that they would be more efficient. But this is pretty well totally failed. I'm not saying the private sector doesn't have a role, but it's failed in terms of the vastly increased waste volumes. It hasn't met the promise of reducing waste, and increased waste costs. So ratepayers are paying an enormous premium to pay to have this material landfill that we all know is otherwise much of it recyclable. Loss of control and ability to act in the community's best interest, loss of control by councils, and the ability for them to act in the best interest of their communities. And this lack of access has stifled innovation and business opportunities. So remember, I'm coming to this whole waste concept from a economic development point of view, rather than seeing waste just as a technical issue, looking at it first as a social issue. So let's look at now. We did a study in 2005 called Reclaiming Auckland Resources, and it was the first time all the costs of all the different councils had been amalgamated and brought together to come up with some figures. And we worked out that the cost of landfill disposal in the Auckland region was $162 million per annum, and left unchecked would cost as much as $281 million per annum by 2024. Now the average cost, but however, I just saw an article on the new waste proposed strategy estimating that the waste industry is turning over about $300 to $400 million per annum in the Auckland region. So I'll touch on that in a minute. The average cost to collect and dispose of domestic waste only, I point out here in this last part, is $154 per tonne, while the average cost to collect and recycle domestic waste is $77 a tonne. So recycling, with what it can get its hands on, is outperforming waste to landfill by a large margin. If you look, so remember this was in 2005, and we projected up until 2005. You'll see it was real information, and you'll see that the bumps and hollows are in line with economic activity. Then we just took the line out further and projected it based on past, where it would be in 2024, and it turned out it would be 281 million. But if you look at our waste tonnages already, in 2010, we're already well above the what was it there, 1.2, just over 1.2 million. We're at 1.4 million already, so we're actually outperforming that curve. We're actually generating a lot more waste than that curve suggested. So already it looks like we're at 300 million per annum. Now multiply that by 10, you've got $3 billion in 10 years that you could build your, whatever Len Brown wants to do, his railway to the airport. There's so many things you can do with that money that we're actually paying two or three large companies to put in landfills. And so here's the graph showing once again that recycling is outperforming in terms of cost. But you can also see why, if you're a waste company and you've secured a big contract, why would you want to do low throughput, high added value recycling when you make far more money out of landfilling? And there's the secret to the whole thing, why we can't allow the private sector to make the choices as to whether this thing, when it's finished at the end of its life, goes to landfill or not, because their vested interests, their shareholder, they have a duty to maximise shareholder return. They're going to want to shove it in the landfill because they make more money out of doing that. And if you look at waste management in Auckland, of course we've had, I'm just digressing very briefly here, but you've had the inorganic collections for years, which we all think is a divine right. Waitakere City got rid of theirs and had very little protest from the community. They've offered certain people free pickup on if they have some stuff they want to get rid of, or a range of different services, which has reduced the cost enormously. Is it really isn't it amazing that in this high-tech sort of value-added world of maximising resources that we have this sort of midden mentality that we can still throw away all these products into a great big hole, which is no different to what we were doing in the Middle Ages. And yet the value has become so vastly higher. And product waste has grown enormously. In 2008, they did a study on what percentage of the domestic waste stream in New York was products, and it was something like 8%. Now it's over 70%. So the value of our waste is no longer just a bit of old wire, a bit of ash, and some old bricks or something, and some recyclable steel. It's enormously valuable, and yet we still have that mentality to throw it away. And that's where the waste companies their fortunes have grown so enormously. But the cost of many things that we do, business as usual, becoming such a crushing burden, we have to think, as James said, of a totally new way of doing things. So now I want to take you to Kaitaia. I have a little bit of a business background. When I was 19, I started a business, and it just happened to be by luck, good timing, and the right time, and as I say, more by luck combined with a little bit of youthful enthusiasm. The business was very successful. So I sold it when I was about 24, and went and lived up in the Kaitaia area. And when the restructuring happened in the economy, the Roger Douglas reforms, small communities like Kaitaia took a real tailspin in terms of economic activity. A lot of government agencies closed down, unemployment rose tremendously, crime, gangs, all that type of thing, and huge attempts by government to throw money at the problem and try and generate economic activity had pretty well 100% failure rate. So, because the community hadn't built the capacity to act on its own behalf, because people had all worked for P&T, railways, forestry, and they'd never had the skills to start businesses. It takes a long time for a community to rebuild, and the small business sector had been stripped out. So we formed a group called CBEC, Community Business and Environment Centre, and we put a proposal to the council to take over the local dump, basically, and turn it into a recycling centre for about the same price as they would have contracted it out to be a dump. And we threw in at our own cost, well, as part of the deal, a curbside recycling collections and a network of outlying drop-off centres. A mini version of what we proposed in Reclaiming Auckland Resources for Auckland. And here's a few photos. That's the photo on the left there is the dump after it had been covered in the little building we built. We won a 3-year pilot contract to do it for, as I say, just a little bit more than it would have cost them to carry on operating it as a dump. We built the wall there for recycling out of recycled materials, and bought a couple little trucks, and away we went. And we got Millie Silhoy, the mayor at the time, to close the dump, and Tim Shadbolt turned up in a beat-up old Holden, and he opened the the new centre. And here are some of the outcomes of that program. 300 kgs per person per annum, which is under half the national average. Auckland is at 1,000 kgs. 70 full-time jobs. Now, those jobs are not just in waste. Out of the money from the dump, you might say, we've generated other businesses, a forestry business, a garden centre. We have a Healthy Homes, a joint venture with iwi to insulate homes. There's about 7 or 8 different businesses running, and recycling and waste is only about a third of the revenue of the company. The company is owned by the whole community, a bit like the Waste Resource Trust and other community or social enterprises, as Rachel spoke about this morning, this new indefinable concept of a business which is not actually private, but it's not a public as well. But we created also a platform for a hard-hit community to act on its own behalf. Now, we've also recently set up a little bus company, and we run it on biodiesel. We have our own biodiesel refinery from the fish and chip shops and so on. And so from that resource which we are able to get our hands onto, which is normally locked in through what we call flow control contracts, where big companies run the contracts and councils give them to them. We broke that pattern, if you like, as other community groups have done. And the Far North now, because it's performing so well, pays so much for every tonne of it gets more back from the landfill tax than it puts in. There's a reason for that, which takes a bit to explain.